Hope everybody's having a good evening. Tonight we're going to continue working on the Conan piece that we started last week. So, this was a blank piece of paper last week. We're setting it up to where we're going. Hey Rich, how are you? Yeah, I have had no time to work on this piece at all, except for a little bit of the Crom in the background. So, we'll just keep working away. David Rex says, good evening. Good evening, David. It has been super crazy in these parts. I hope everyone's having a lovely week. It's Wednesday. It's New Comic Book Day. I did not go to I haven't been a Wednesday guy in a long time. So I usually go on a Sunday if I go. And I go about once a month, maybe. Anymore. Just haven't had time. And I went to the store last weekend. I saw my buddy Jonathan, who's in the stream regularly. He was at the store. They didn't have a couple of the books I was looking to read. I wanted to read the new Daniel Warren Johnson Transformers. They did not have the most recent Conan book. So I wound up just picking up a couple of old comics and the new Dan Clowes graphic novel. Beat up old sword, right? I was actually, I just did a post over on Blue Sky about Charlton Comics and how much I enjoy them. And they're great. They have a great whole line of different horror comics. This one's The Many Ghosts of Dr. Graves. And you can see it's got a story by a young Mike Zeck in it. Who went on to do like The Punisher and stuff. But yeah, they're some of my favorite comics to just pick up. I love anthologies, and they're inexpensive. So I highly recommend them in these October days. David says he loves Charlton Comics, so excellent. Sometimes I wonder if I'm the last of the appreciators of Charlton Comics. But good to know there's some other folks out there. Flintstones, that was actually, I don't know if you're familiar, but that's actually some of Tom DeFalco, who was editor-in-chief at Marvel. Some of his early writing credits were in the Flintstones and Scooby-Doo comics he did for Charlton. There's Jonathan, says bye Crom. Things have been very hectic around the house, and I've been working my butt off on the Kickstarter, the Undersea Euro Kickstarter, which we all know is coming up next month. I'll show you some of the stuff I drew. This is one of the rewards is you could have your pet fish drawn into the comic. There's a goldfish that I drew. Here's that. Remember we were talking a couple streams ago about having an extra arm for Krakus so that I could have him pointing at different stuff during the thing. And then I also have little cartoons of myself, actually. Some of the different rewards, like one of them is where I'll go to the beach and find a sweet shell for you. There's me holding a shell saying sweet. And then another's where I'll jump in the ocean in December, write your name. Here's some other cartoons of different rewards. I send pretty good soup to a friend. There's the producer credit. Not now, I'm producing. Yeah, different stuff. It'll be colored in on the Kickstarter. Jonathan asks, was that your latest Charlton pickup from Saturday? No, that one's actually in my bag at work, in the office. I read the first story. I haven't read the whole thing yet. I like to take it in chunks. But it was fun. It's fun stuff. I just have boxes of them, and it's like I can reread them, pretty regularly because they're all standalones. David says he's so excited for Undersea Hero. We get a highlight there, of course. Was it Blowfish Bobby? You were working at the Springs Con. I was sitting next to Marvel, and yeah, there's all kinds of stretch goals, and some of them are like more books, obviously, and I have like a tier that if we reach it, it'll automatically kick the next one into gear. There's all kinds of stuff. There's a zine. There's a making of zine that'll have a story that Jay did, a story that Jeff McClellan, who wrote the Tick stories I worked on, that he did. There's a stretch goal for us doing a full book of the Space Frog, which was actually what Jeff and I contributed to the Ringo-nominated book, Magic Bullet. That was an anthology that was nominated for Best Anthology a few years back. Jay Kennedy's in the house. Everybody else doing good? Everyone having a nice evening? They all have something good for dinner? I had some Chinese food. It was good. I had some noodles. Light source. Just have to keep remembering this isn't the light source. I should send Campana an email and bug him about it. See if he's even thought of Bobby the Blowfish since we were rapping about it at Colorado Springs. It turns out I will be at Rhode Island Comic Con first weekend in November. I wasn't sure based on certain stuff that's going on, but I will be there. I will only be there Saturday and Sunday, though. I will not be there on Friday. Your wife and talk about Bobby the Blowfish a lot. Bobby the Blowfish, low key, a lot of potential for its own tales and spin-offs. It's just absurd. And it has to completely be based on someone that Chris knows, of course, as he was coming up with the ideas for it. And we were both just riffing back and forth. That's always fun, when the creative juices are going. I forgot that I put Crom's like leg going this way, so that's why I had to erase that. Because he's like coming out of his chair. I'm going to show some of the spider webs like stretching to his chair. And then we drew these little monsters. I got to figure out this space here. He's got to come in front of Conan a little bit. We need to have more of separation between this section and this section. It's almost to where I would want to put like somehow some smoke or something, but I think we're beyond that, and we're overthinking just like something I'm putting way more effort into than I probably should with everything going on right now. And the beauty of being at this stage is I can just keep thinking, keep adding stuff, keep milling about, because we can always erase. Pencil, we can always erase. When we get to the inking portion, that's when we lose our ability to do that. So let's keep it moving. I feel like this is just going to end up being blacked out. Because we don't want it to detract from what's going on in the foreground. If you have too much going on all your levels, then there's just, you can't even really focus on anything. So I'm glad though that your wife and you like Bobby the Blowfish. I promise I will bother Chris Campana about Bobby the Blowfish. I will let him know that there's a fervor, a demand out there. I didn't even take a pic. I should have. I don't even know if I took a picture of that. You can look on my phone. No, I didn't even get a picture of Bobby the Blowfish. But I gave it to Chris, and if he gave it away, I'll be mad at him. We'll be feuding if he gave it away. I have a Chris Campana original. Oh, thank you so much. I'm glad you'll be on board for the Kickstarter. There's all kinds of goofy rewards, and then there's serious rewards, like as far as like stuff to buy, that kind of stuff. But then there's like, send my friend a can of soup. My cat decides what the best tasting fish is. There's all kinds of fun stuff. I even came up with some absurd ones where, like, I always kind of marvel at the stretch goals that people come up with. And like some people hit them. So I made one where I actually like, if we made enough money, I would like buy a car off of Craigslist and paint a bunch of fish on the side and then drive it to a convention way further away than I should. People upstairs are stomping around. Sorry if you can hear that. Undersea Hero is just about having fun, being goofy, and doing something enjoyable. Conan, look out behind you. Hey, it's my Uncle Bill. Hey, Bill. It was nice talking to you the other day. the telephone. It's a nice surprise. There's going to be some interesting inking techniques used on this. Some that I haven't used in a little while, but I think they'll work out nicely in the end, creating separation and textures, which I think is paramount to good comic book illustration. Easily identifying that the different surfaces do different things and they are different without having to like really overly think it too much. You know, there's got to be like a user-friendly aspect to the illustrations because you're trying to tell a story that they understand and that anybody can understand. You know, it's an interesting thing. And I've gotten myself in trouble definitely by doing, you know, far too complicated panel layouts, having too much stuff going on. You know, that's a deductive process that is tough. It was tough for me when I was a young artist, and I think it's tough for a lot of young artists based on the work I see. You know, knowing when to pull back and make a more effective drawing that way, instead of just piling everything that you can into it. Because like when I was growing up, the comics that were being made at that time, it was all about just like how much stuff can you put on a page. You know, the new comics, like that was before like I was reading old comics. Bill, you read some old comics back in the day. My dad did too, but his mom threw out all his comics. The one he remembers having, and he's told me this story a couple of times, is he definitely had the Brave and the Bold first Justice League. He saw it in a store once when we were there, and it was like, you know, it all the memories came back to him. Yeah, at this point, we're still just penciling it in. I mean, I haven't even had time to pick up a pen for this, so. You know, in the deep background, you're going to see a stone wall. You can see it, like right here, where you can see little different pieces of, like, look like cobblestones. The further I go, the more I'm thinking about doing this top portion in on a separate sheet. Phil says, comics were never as detailed as yours. They were a step up from Stickmen. I love old comics. I was showing some earlier on the stream. Here's the. This is a really good one that Charlton put out. It's a story called The Wire Man. It's like an early horror sci-fi piece, and it's like one of the first that I was aware of, like artificial intelligent creature coming to life from computers. because this was in 1978, and it actually, this is a reprint, so like it was probably around 1974. And yeah, I highly recommend this one. This is actually one of my favorites that Charlton ever put out. You see there's multiple stories. There's one by Pat Boyette, who I think is very underratedly. That's great, great drawing. I mean, comics evolved quite a bit over the decades. Different artists sort of like changed the standard of which was expected. One of them being Neil Adams, who was, you know, coming into comics through Archie, but then when he switched over to more adventure comics after doing Ben Casey, the newspaper strip as a young man, like he brought that illustrative flair with him, and it really changed the way it was so popular that people wanted more of it. Like there was a demand now, like, oh, they can be drawn like this. People didn't even know. And there was a lot of pushback actually from people in the industry who knew that like the amount of work and rigor that would go into that evolving trend. You know, if hyper detail became the norm, it just meant like it took longer to do your job. Another one was Bernie Wrightson. He was another one that like early on, when he was first putting his work in, was turning in like super detailed pages. Same thing with Kaluta, like all those studio guys. They were fundamentally changing the landscape of comics and the art that was done for them. You know, it was the EC guys in the 1950s, like Frazetta, Torres, and Williamson, like they were the first to really push the envelope. But when that EC folded and everything happened with the comics code and everything, it took a long time for other artists who grew up on that stuff to get an opportunity to like start pushing in that direction. Like I've heard from so many old timers that they were hoping to bring back EC or start a new EC. You know, that was something that Ralph Reese told me on several occasions, and I think he said as much in some interviews, so I don't think I'm betraying any trust. It's just that they expected it to go further than it did. Gotta get my chair, my knees are a little tired. There we go. And here, working on these little demon guys. Look at his hand coming forward. Very simple gestural hand. And it serves as actually part of the framing device because the eye comes down and you want it to stop here. And he's looking in. You know, it's a really simple thing that a lot of artists have used. It's not groundbreaking, it's just effective. Framing the subject is important. These are the knuckles. Anybody watching any good horror movies? It's October, you know. Everybody who knows me knows I can't keep up with Inktober with all my other work. But I do watch the spooky horror movies. I was watching some, I watched The Oblong Box, which is a Christopher Lee and Vincent Price film based on an Edgar Allan Poe story. Desiree says No One Will Save You on Hulu is good for a horror movie. Horror movie? Yeah. So I'll check it out. I've got Hulu. I have Hulu. Jonathan Brown has seconded No One Can Save You. Okay, so I'll put that on the must-watch list. I enjoy scary thriller type movies. I like horror movies, but I'm not always a big fan of like the gore fest. Like I was in the theater for the movie called Green Room, which is like a notoriously gory movie. And I don't say that I saw the movie. I say I was in the theater. I missed quite a great deal of it. David says, Trick or Treat for me. Yeah, that's that anthology movie. I've seen that. That one's good. Green Room was too much for me. It was the box cutters. One injury I once sustained at work involved a pen knife, so that was not pleasant. So Jonathan. Arm stuff. Yes, it's a brutal movie. Jonathan says you saw more eyelids or hands than the movie. Yes, exactly. I saw the floor. Um, I saw eyelids. I saw the floor. I saw a lot of that. Hey, Aaron's in the room. Hey, Aaron. This is his drawing for his Conan Facebook group. So, hi, Aaron. Hello. Now, one thing I'm trying to decide on is, do I put another one of those creatures here and then push that back? Can I pull that off? Let's take a look. Let's just rough in just where the silhouette would be. Let's see. We can have Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, I haven't gotten to inking it yet, but you can see we've got the big Crom skeleton coming forward and the giant's chair that he was sitting in, and we got the little monsters and the lady. Trying to pull some of this out and clean it up a little bit. The base of the chair is here. This comes forward this way, like this. It's like, well, why would you add that there? Does it just make it busier? Because we needed to finish the frame around the characters. If you look at traditional fine art, if you look at the way you'll see, like in a Caravaggio, the way all of the objects are looking towards the main subject, like it looks like a crowded room, but there's a purpose behind each of the figures. They're all bringing this centralized, and you see looking at Conan, looking at Conan, looking at Conan, looking up. Like everyone is looking, the focus is here on Conan, and he is missing the main character. Like the danger behind him is missing. You didn't think you'd get a Caravaggio reference tonight, did you? Well, it's the fine art talk for the evening. Or if you look at any of the Raphaelites, like Titian or Veronese, Tintoretto. Velasquez also. There's a great Velasquez at the MFA in Boston. Thank you, Jay. Jay says, looking good. Jay and I have been doing comic shows together since 2007. Long time. We get to 2027, Jay, we're gonna like make jackets or something. We'll have like a patch on a smoking jacket or something. Very classy. No, we'll probably just end up going bowling or something. One thing I do want to do, if I knew where my bag of tricks was. One thing that helps me visualize just the edges of everything, lets me know where everything goes, is just take my brush pen and pull the border. Anybody who's seen my originals, I do like an organic border around everything, and it's just because I like it. I'm not a big fan of ruled lines. I like character. I like the lines to have a purpose. And the borders in many of my comics are hand drawn like this just because I think it creates a different flow of reading from panel to panel. I don't know. I find those perfectly straight lines to be sometimes distracting with all the other artwork. Because they're so different. It's the same thing with some of the lettering trends right now. As you see the lettering, it looks as though it's sitting on top of the artwork and it's not a part of the artwork. Because it's so clearly done by a different hand. And sometimes that'll take me out of it. Okay. Now we know where the edges are. We can plan accordingly. Because you don't want your characters to be reacting to the border. And what do I mean by that? I mean by where if you are drawing a line or a shape, is that you unintentionally like make it narrower because it's getting closer to the edge, or if the line connecting to the edge somehow is reacting, like it's going up or down instead of straight through. Like if you see that break, it has to look intentional instead of reactive or accidental or sloppy. At least that's my intent. You know, everybody has different goals with their artwork, and you can do whatever you want with your panels. You could have no panel borders. Like Will Eisner did wonderful stories with no panel borders. There was one he did called The Last Days in Vietnam, in which he used no panel borders. And I think it was Dropsy Avenue, or there was another one, or The Building. There was another one of his graphic novels where he never used panel borders on any of the pages. Like I said last time, I think of the penciling stage as the thinking stage. It's not the rendering stage. I'm planning around the light sources and looking at the different needs that are going to come up compositionally. Now, something as simple as like right here, you see this finger that crosses the line of that leg and creates a break there? Just that little break pushes that figure back. It pushes it back in the composition rather than having it be in sort of floating in space. So visually, you now have a benchmark so that this hand actually cuts in front of it, so you know it's in the foreground. It's not part of this midground or the background. These two characters right here, this one and this one, part of the foreground and the framing elements. And we'll also, because of where the light source is right here, light source, we're going to have some cast shadows coming this way off of her. Probably something like that. And I think this will be entirely blacked out in her foreground area. And then from where this chair is, let's think about it. Let's think about where this line is. There's a line right here at the edge of the chair. Light source is here. So what we actually want is a straight line right there, because the chair will have some cast shadow elements. Hey, Isaiah. Oh, thank you very much. Hey, I was super psyched for you to see you were doing that cartoon show. You had some really nice stuff on your table. I hope it was a really good show. I think you said that was your first show, so like, huge congratulations. It's hard getting out there, so that's a big big accomplishment, is taking your work out there to show to people for the first time. So congratulations. Isaiah says, thanks so much. It was a blast. That's great to hear. I hope you made $1 billion and somebody walked up and said, here's a giant movie contract. You have total control. We don't own anything. We're just going to give you money to borrow some of your ideas, or to let you make your ideas gigantic. It is. No, and I've said it plenty of times before. There are some shows that are really expensive to do, and just getting it out there in front of people is value add. And it doesn't mean, it means you can't have all your shows like that, but unless you're independently wealthy or something. But there is a lot of value to that. And there were shows that I did this year, like, that I didn't make very much money, but like handed out a zillion flyers, told people about Undersea Hero and these live streams, and met lots of other creators. So you have a good attitude, man. And I wish you all the best. They give you that excellent, not discouraged at all, wonderful. Remember, if they give you the giant movie contract, if you could hire some of your old tick artist friends to do some development sketches or something for you, we would be ever grateful. I met an artist that was about, I don't know, 12 at the last show that I did, and basically was like, hey, when you're in charge of Time Warner and running the entire industry, remember your old pal Ian. Throw me a bone. Hey, all right. I miss Gabe. I haven't seen him in some time. He didn't go to San Diego this year. That's like my only opportunity to see him. So I actually owe him an email. I'm way overdue with him for an email. Just been so busy. Yeah, he and Carrie, and they got their kiddo that they've posted pictures of, so I don't feel bad mentioning that they have another human in their existence. Well, Ben's got a million things to do. I think Ben's doing just fine. I've actually only bugged Ben once outside of comic conventions. I try not to bother him. I considered asking him if he would let me do like an Undersea Hero meets the Tick print or something, but I don't know. I don't want to bother him too much. I've never asked him for anything, so. And he's never asked me for anything, so you never know what people you meet through work and stuff. Okay, buddy, mind if I borrow your multi-million-dollar character there take it for a spin on a print? Ben is very sweet, he is, but I don't ever want to be a bother to people. But I think a Tick Undersea Hero print would be delightful. Desiree, if you talk to Ben and you want to ask him, you have my blessing. I know you see him around once in a while at conventions and such. Maybe at one of your big movie events. I don't know if he's a baseball fan. I don't know if you'd see him at a Dodger game. That's not something I ever asked Ben, if he was part of the small group of us comic book creators that loves baseball. That was actually one thing that Campaign and I bonded over when we first met, was like, oh, you're a comic person and you like baseball. Ron Mars, I think that was how we became friendly at a convention, was just he had a Mets hat on, so at the time the Mets were good too, so I had to ask him if he was like, are you a new Mets fan or an old Mets fan? He's like, I am a lifetime Mets fan. Now, when we see these rocks here, I know there's just lines on them now, but this being the light source, and like we talked about, there will be light emanating from the light source, and all of the lines on the rocks in this arc here, basically this circle, will be a lot lighter. And as it gets further away, there will be more rendering as you get further away from the light source. One of my experiments that I did was and I did it on a commission, was a Conan piece where he's on a pirate ship. And I rendered that with as many tiny lines as I could conceive of. And it was just to see what it would look like. The client didn't ask for it. And when it's a private commission, like I experiment with the work sometimes. And they loved it, so it worked out. But it was an interesting study in trying to create subtlety and texture differences with like linear hatching, like a Franklin Booth or a Gary Gianni. There's a hardcover collection of Gianni's Monster Men that came out from Dark Horse. It's really good. Something wrong with my mic. I have one fix I can try. Hold on. Hello? Is that better? Let me know if that's better. Thanks, Ethan. Yeah, I haven't changed my setup. I just have the one camera here. Excellent. Good. Sometimes I mumble too, so it's not always the technology. It can be, but sometimes it's just that I mumble. So I'm sorry if that was ever the case. There we go. Thank you for letting me know. I can't hear my own output or whatever, so I rely on you people to tell me if it's messed up. Yeah, there's a lot of lines on this one. Thank you, Ethan. There's a lot going on. Got a lot to fill in and figure out. There's going to definitely need to be some more dark areas on the foreground pieces just to get it to create that separation. Someone needs to make another Conan movie, is what Ethan says, and I would go see it, and I would have fun, but I don't know what the source material will produce as far as like what an audience would like. You know, it's very dated material, and also like it was repackaged, the fantasy, like hard R fantasy with, Game of Thrones. So I wonder if people would see Conan who don't necessarily know the character and be like, oh, it's like Game of Thrones. It's because that happened with John Carter. That was a movie that came out from Disney a few years ago and it flopped. not more than a few years ago, maybe 10 plus years ago now. Um, and I heard people say, "Oh, it ripped off of Star Wars," because everyone was like, "Oh, it's flopped. That means it's no good." I saw it and I enjoyed it, and it's found like a cult audience, a cult following at this point. But yeah, like when something derivative becomes more popular than the original source material, I think it's tough for it to attain recognition or even an audience at this day and age. People are so quick to want to point out, some of that stuff. Yeah, if it was well written, sure. I actually think that for that to happen, it would have to deviate from the source material. I don't know if Tower of the Elephant or Frost Giant's Daughter would hold up. Maybe it would. I just question it. I would like it to be good. I only ever saw 2 episodes of Game of Thrones, actually. That was something I used to get tisked for at conventions. I love hand lettering. You guys, you folks know I do. You folks know I do. It's one of my favorite things about making comics. Working in some like serif alterations, trying to make it look cool. No ruler, just go for it. Do you guys have favorite fantasy books or movies or TV shows other than Conan? Like I'm a big fan of Tolkien, and I've read some Michael Moorcock in my day, like the Elric of the Stormbringer. I read that. Um, and I like the cheesy fantasy movies from the '80s, like David Carradine and what was it, Circle of Iron, and there were all kinds of there was like a fantasy rush like around when what was it, like Beastmaster and post Conan. Like Conan was what kind of kicked it off, and I enjoy those silly derivative ones too. Which you can watch most of them on my favorite streaming service right now, which is Tubi. They have a really good selection of horror movies as well. So if you're looking for some Halloween viewing, hey, no worries, Aaron. Thanks for popping in, and we'll try to get this thing done not too long. I guess bottom line is like I really like the fantasy genre in comic and comic form best, but I also like books. Ethan says my favorite fantasy series is a kid series called Redwall, 22 books well written with warrior mice. Oh, that's the Brian Jacques stuff. Yeah, yeah, I remember that as a kid. Right? Yep, Fafhrd the Grey Mouser. Yeah, there's a great mini series that Epic put out that Mike Mignola did the drawings for. With I think Al Williamson inked it, or maybe it was Pete Craig Russell. I don't remember. Um, and Howard Chaykin did the adaptation. Really good. And then there was the one that Chaykin did in the 70s in Sword of Sorcery, which it's an interesting book, being like one of his first comics, like feature full length comics. But it's also interesting seeing like there was a backup story by a young Walt Simonson, and I think that was just really fascinating seeing his evolution from that to like Manhunter, one of the best comic short story serials of that era. Got our little corner box, man. We got to draw. I need to get a piece of paper so I stop smudging this stuff like an amateur. What's on here? Just some face studies. Hey, Phil. Yeah, here's where we're at. I'm probably gonna light box this stuff, this portion, just so that it looks clean and nice and matches, like the original one. So, but we can draw our little corner box, man. I'm actually gonna lightly erase a chunk of it. It tells us the space we have to occupy, but I want to make it a little less stiff, give it a little bit more movement to it. A little more bend in the spine so that it has a little bit more elasticity to it. I don't need it to be exactly like the original. I just need it to feel right. And that's generally how I've felt about a lot of my intent in comics. Like, I don't need realism, I need believability. I don't need to trace buildings or trace, weapons or trace that stuff. No, I just need the indication and believe what I'm looking at and know that it fits the internal logic of the piece. That's generally how I think as far as like structurally creating that, visual and storytelling lexicon. Got quite a few people in the stream right now, so thanks everybody for coming to hang out and watch me work on this commission. Uh, I think we're going to get the pencils basically done today. We're not going to have the logo done, but we'll have the pencils done. And we'll see, maybe we can ink something small before we check out of here. That would be nice, right? Start to get the feel for the finished piece. Where the hip is. Get the knee joint. Because there's volume to the knee. Like it's not just like, you hit the front and then it takes a left. There's actually volume where the two sockets like fit together. So like the femur coming from the hip down, need a little more meat there. A little more meat here. Ethan asks, do you ever feel overwhelmed working on a piece that complex, or is it normal for you now? I definitely do. That's why I sometimes have to block out, just forget some of the other elements. And I spend a lot of time on the preliminary drawing, the quick look, usually. Like in this case, I didn't have time. So there are places where I think I would definitely have approached things a little different. I think the story overall is fun on this piece, but I think that there's definitely some compositional elements that I would have moved around, but I needed to get moving. And, there's the deadline sometimes has to supersede, necessarily what I want to do. So I had to get moving. I haven't been able to keep up with everything going on because I've just been so busy. Hopefully I can post a picture or something soon to give an update of everything that's been going on. But until some things are finished, I don't want to preemptively post anything. There's our little figure. Because in this case right now, I'm just thinking about this little corner box guy. Because like here's the original. And obviously like mine's a little different, but I think it conveys the overall feeling. I see like this elbow is back further and then it has it coming down. See, I don't know if I like that, so I'm going to change that. Like everybody's seen that original a million times because they put it on every friggin' issue. And add just a little more arm. Do you get overwhelmed with complicated stuff? Like, how do you approach it when you're working on a piece or you're coming up with an idea? Like, is there a way that helps you? Or do you like feel like you need to start over? Like that's because that's usually the instinct, and I don't know. It's usually what I work with young artists or people who don't do it all the time on is like, nope, keep pushing forward, push all the way to the other side of getting it finished. And then take what you learned to the next piece. That's generally my line of thinking. because a half-finished page isn't worth anything, and I don't necessarily believe that I was ever able to really learn enough from not having enough pages. You have to get enough finished pages under your belt, and I don't think there's an editor in the world that would disagree with that. Ethan says he steps aside and then comes back with fresh eyes a couple hours or days later. That's a good way to do it. Absolutely. Yep. Definitely starting to feel the day. 9:10. We got a little ways to go. So yeah, I think we're going to be able to ink something. Maybe one of those little creatures in the foreground, or do you want me to ink the little corner box man? I could do that. We could fully finish this little corner box man. Maybe that's what we should do. Wow, we got a lot of people in here now. Hello. Welcome to my weekly live stream. Working on some corner box art on this Conan commission. Which I had no time to work on since last week. The person who this is for was in the chat earlier, so, and he's happy with it. So that's good. That's what we want. See the top of part of the knee here. The hip is three-dimensional. Always trying to think of volume, and light source is what is going through my head when I'm working on this stuff. It's like, think about the light source. In this case, it's a neutral light source. Even on the original, I think there was barely even the indication. Yeah, actually there is a decent light source. It's actually up here. Basically the price, where the price is, if the price is forward. But every now and again, I just like to look at just where it is in the context of the piece to make sure I'm not doing something I shouldn't be doing. There we go. There's our little corner box Conan pencils. I'll come back down here and where's my bag of tricks? There it is. Sit back down. Let's see where we're at. Just have some fun, you know? It's work, but you draw on Conan or Conan stuff, it's hard to not have some fun. We're using paper or comic board right now. This is Bristol. It's like your typical comic page paper. I use just a regular smooth finish. I like a smooth finish because I can do different textures on it, and also when I'm doing color illustrations, if you know watercolor, on a smooth Bristol, the color kind of sits on top of the paper. It only gets absorbed so much. And because that's the case, it's a little more forgiving. You can go in and add some water and move things around a little bit. It does not take big washes as well, so it ends up having a different quality to the finish. It's got more of a colored drawing feeling to it, which I like. I don't mind that at all. This is just a Kuretake pocket brush pen. It's not really a brush pen, but they call it that. It's an inking marker that has a flexible tip, so you can see it gets a pretty good line variance, and I happen to like it quite a bit. I've almost exclusively switched over to these. I used to use a combination of Faber-Castell and these, but now I use these and I use my brush pens. Did a little bit of the face details, and then oops, we got a little piece of eraser stuck on our brush there. The beauty of these is if you practice with them, so you can get really excellent. Just you can get any line thickness you want with one pass. You don't have to make 7 passes with like a pen nib or anything like that. And it has a painterly quality to it, which, because I was trained as a painter before I was really into drawing, like that's where my training is. So like knowing how a brush reacts to paper. Dennis says he likes using the 400 mixed media for watercolor. Yeah, the mixed media paper is great. Like that's what it's designed for. It's designed for wet medium. It used to be that way with Bristol, but I actually talked to someone that worked at Strathmore, and they said that, you know, a number of years ago, they made changes to their paper. And he couldn't tell why the mixed media paper wasn't selling as well. And I said, well, I've been buying your products for I don't know, 30 years. And nobody told me you changed why you changed it. We just knew that you changed it. We didn't know that there was an alternative and that there was a purpose to it. So there was no marketing. Or with a brush pen like this, you can just let it rip. Look at that nice chunky line. Look at that. So fun. What type of watercolor do you use, Dennis? Do you like to use out of the tube? Is there a brand that you like? Are you a fan of the dry stuff, the cakes? What do you like to use? I mean, I've been so happy to see so many people using more traditional paint than like the Copic markers that basically like took over the industry for a number of years. I've talked about my volatile relationship with Copic markers. I just I couldn't get them to do what I wanted them to do. Like it was between painting and drawing. So I don't know. It was expensive and I got out of it. Hey, it's Gregory. How you doing? Oh, thanks so much. It's got like these cool little sword. Dennis says he uses White Knight pants. It's a Russian brand. I don't know that one. What do I use? I use Windsor Newton. I still use Windsor Newton, and I like the Academy, the Grumbacher stuff. I think they both do. I think they're both really good. You can get a nice saturated color with them. I have to keep turning it because I like to get a specific angle for different lines. Some lines are pull lines, some lines are push lines. It's just something that I've grown accustomed to. So you can get really nice quality brush strokes with these. You can see how sharp that is. Nice and sharp. This is the sable. This is not the synthetic. So if you're looking to buy one, they're a little more expensive, but they last forever. I've only had to change the tip like 3 times in years. I can just keep refilling it with my preferred ink. It's like the perfect tool for me. I want to get a different line quality. So I'm going to switch tools. This is actually probably one of the cleaner line quality tools I have, just because it gets such a nice, yeah, like you can go in and just dab and use like basically painting techniques and go in there and grab whole sections. It's such a nice tool. It's a quality tool. I've actually bought them as gifts for people for Christmas and stuff just because I like them so much. And Dennis asks, how did you learn to get a steady hand with brush inking? I've been practicing, but it's slow going. It does take a lot of practice. And one of the things that for me is that not every inking line requires the same speed. Some of them I have to move fast, like, and I just have to practice doing them over and over. Like these little lines like this, if I do these slow, they will be shaky because I actually have very unsteady hands. I do not have steady hands. So it's practice, lots and lots of practice. There's no shortcut for me on that one. I was not a like a, I don't know what you call it, like a natural in any stretch. And actually, I hated inking when I first started out, but I just forced myself to keep practicing with a brush because that was the finish that so many of my favorite artists used. And it's impossible. No matter how many people tell me they can get the same lines with a pen, I can always tell. I had people like esteemed, fantastic professional inkers, like a Joe Rubenstein, tell me like, "Oh, I can mimic any line with any tool," and I disagree. Phenomenal artists, just there are certain tools that make certain marks, and that's why we don't have just one drawing tool. And with a brush, it's very versatile. Like you can have it do different lines. Long, slow lines are like the hardest. And there's actually a tutorial online of Neil Adams explaining inking with a brush, and how he teaches other people. And you don't just use your wrist. And it actually comes down to how you hold your tool. You need to be able to move it, turn it while you're moving it. You need to be able to have the dexterity to turn it a little bit. You can see like when I'm moving it, there's a little bit of a turn. And then for some lines, I've got just like the quick wrist action. There's different ones for different things, and it's not something that's really taught. I mean, if you do watercolors, which you do, that's a great way to practice different brush strokes. It's just do a painting that do like a monochromatic painting, and then use one brush for the whole thing. Don't switch brushes, and just try to do the whole thing with one brush. If you don't want to go like straight into ink with your brush pen or your brush inking. If you're more comfortable with watercolor, because if you're doing painting, like yeah, I'm sure you're rocking and rolling with your watercolors, but it's just practice. And honestly, I've messed up so many over the years that like it's trial and error. It's reading about it. Um, in that tutorial, Neil Adams talks about different lines that he does with his shoulder. It's a really great video. I've shared it to a ton of people. Yeah, check it out. He's talking at a school in it. He talks about moving your whole shoulder. It's a really good. It's a better explanation than I can give. That's for sure. I haven't figured out a way to simplify that explanation like I have with like how I draw stuff, like breaking it down and using like a modified version of the Loomis method that I call the tubes and cubes method. But it's funny if you watch that video as far as brush inking goes, and then you watch how there's other videos on YouTube of Joe Kubert inking. There's one where it's Joe Kubert and John Romita Sr. inking in the same video. and you see that they both do it completely differently. Um, Joe Kubert to me has one of the best lines of all time. Um, that organic, what my painting teacher in college would describe as juicy line. I honestly think that if he were to use like a Hunt 102, his line would be very like Gibson-esque, Charles Dana Gibson. And I know artists that just use pen nibs, like Ralph Reese pretty much just uses pen nibs and he just does incredible work, but there's a different line quality to it. And maybe that's, something some people want to use and some people don't. Like he is the direct line to inking in the Wally Wood style. Like he worked with Wally Wood for much of his life and has all that learned knowledge and everything he learned for himself in those beautiful pictures that he does. I dragged him to a convention because I don't think he really wanted to go. But he came with me to a show in Fairhaven called the South Coast Toy and Comic Show. And it very likely will be the last show he's ever attended because like he doesn't really seem to care, about going to them, which is, fine. But I think his fans would love to see him. Um, and he sat down and showed me how he did the textures because he was inking when I was a kid. He was working for Valiant and he was inking those beautiful James Brock and who was the other artist? Steve Ditko. Magnus Robot Fighter issues for Valiant Comics. And he actually showed me how he did those incredible honeycomb textures over Magnus's cloak and everything else. It was an incredible opportunity to hear how this guy did it. And he was basically like, you just got to sit there and put the time in, on top of that. On top of learning the technique and taking your time, and that's something I've tried to be better about, especially with individual pieces. Sometimes with pages, you can't take your time. Like you just have to learn a few tricks that can get you through the panels that you don't have the ability to spend, a zillion hours on rendering. Or you have to vary your shots in ways that you allocate your labor time. That's another thing that I think that I learned on the fly as a professional. Unfortunately, like in print, I had to learn what shots work well enough to tell the story well and hit the deadline. And I did. Like I did. There were times where I took too many shortcuts, I think, but sometimes you have to, go to family functions and do things and I have to make more time somehow. And I don't work with assistants. I will occasionally hire a flatter and I'll occasionally work with a letterer, but I prefer lettering myself whenever possible. Well, let's get our eraser in here and let's clean this up and see where we're at, see how we're coming through. Now, I'm not going to watercolor this one, but I probably will digitally color it with like the old-fashioned coloring techniques that I use, where I actually use the printing plate screens instead of really coloring techniques. It's more of a printmaking process. I bought the True Grit texture supply, and then I've modified it considerably since then. I would also consider just throwing some Zipatone on here. And then you'll see one thing that I will do when I get finished. Like this is a yeah, you can license it. It's not a big deal. I could also just uninstall it and use my own screens because I've built so much of my own stuff at this point, you know. I pay licensing fee for fonts. I bought all of the commercial licenses for like the comic craft stuff that I used to use. It's just good practice, good policy. People should get paid. I actually went up to Richard Starkings, who runs Comic Craft at San Diego Comic Con. Not this last time, but the last time I was there a couple of years ago. You know, and I just thanked him for all the great fonts over the years, and you know, that was actually pretty cool meeting him. He's from over in England, so I didn't know if I'd ever get to meet him. Comic Craft kind of took over comic book lettering, like at a certain point in the '90s. I'm getting tired. I don't know why. But anyway, you'll see. I actually think I'm going to use some of like a fingerprint technique on this just to make it a little grittier. There's too much like white area here, and I don't want to just fill it in with black because I'll lose some of my depth. So I need a different texture there, and the right tools actually. Um, Kind of like a finger span tip dab that I'll do. So we'll add some texture so it gives a little bit more, what would you call it? Personality. Hey, Billy's here. How are you? I haven't finished listening to part 2 of your St. Pierre interview, but I'm sure I will finish it at some point soon. I had it on in the background while I was working today. Billy says, I'm all right. And the second part of Joe stumped me hard. Bit of an off night. I need to be on air more to keep my reps up. Is there anything other than being on the air that can help with like broadcast practice, you find? Or is it just one of those like you gotta get the reps in at the shoot enough baskets or whatever version you want to. Billy says, like anything, you got to sharpen your tools. We had a month in between and it just threw me off. That is a long time. A month is a long time to split up a conversation. I would think that would be very difficult. Billy says it can be. I feel like illustrating can be the same way. You regress in general when you're away. It takes time to get back on course. I can understand that. Yeah, sure. Sure. Sometimes when I see something I want to add to while I'm working on a different part. I think we're going to ink this hand and then we're going to call it a night. It's been a long day, but had a lot going on this past couple weeks, so. But it's always good to see you folks. Thanks for hanging out with me. A lot of people came into the stream tonight. I see the count, and like when a whole bunch of people pop in, I'm like, wow, what happened? I feel like there needs to be this part needs to go. Ethan says he looks forward to it every Wednesday. Thank you very much, Ethan. Who says I've got to do the old proverbial pen to paper in general. And Desiree says I need to go chew off the rest of my nails. Damn Dodgers. Yeah, I don't have the game on in the studio, but from the sound of it, it's not going as you would prefer. So I saw the highlights of the first game. That was not great for Kershaw. I understand he's going to the Hall of Fame and all that. But he's the ace, so. Billy says he definitely forgot definitely good to have a midweek distraction. Totally forgot baseball's in the postseason. Yeah, when your team's not in it, it's difficult to stay focused on it. But fear not, hockey season is upon us. A joyous, wondrous day. The first home game for the Bees. Only the bottom of the third. There goes my sleep for the night. Bah. It's not as bad as the last two games, but I'm a wreck. Football and basketball for me, says Billy. Chiefs play tomorrow night. Expect my usual touchdown posts. See, I was never as big of a football person. You know, I'll pay attention a little bit because I listen to some of the sports radio, but like always just been a hockey, baseball guy. That's what I played. That's what I follow. Did you play football, Billy, or was that how you got into it, or were you just a fan in general of football? Family member? Forgot the other ear there. Billy says he watched football because his dad liked it, and it kind of stuck with him. And he played hockey. He fell out of it after he hurt his hip. That's a bummer. But that's cool. Used to watch with your old man. That's nice. Well, let's do our high-tech zoom out before we call it a night here. Use the hand crank on the camera stand so you can see where we're at. I'll keep working on the inks, and yeah, if we're not done by next week, we might be finishing it on next week's stream, but it'll be done, either this week or by next stream. So thanks everybody for hanging out. I hope everybody has a good night, and yeah, go bees, and hope to see you in a week. Night, everybody.